Ale po- perfect. Thank you. Minute 4.
Hey everyone!
Hey, we're here.
How are you? How is everyone? This is crazy. We have 200 sessions across the globe right now.
And I believe it's being interpreted in 9 different languages. And I also think that this is just a really historic moment because it's the first of its kind. But in saying that, I think we just need to make some space just in case there are some technical. But we're excited to have you here.
So excited. As Zane was saying, there will be some technical glitches, but that's normal. We want you guys to relax and we want you guys to just take a deep breath and absorb all this because we are in a global panel. This is a global movement and it's so exciting and amazing to see this happening.
And I think it's to mark like such a monumental moment. One thing we can all just do together is take a breath with thousands and thousands of people who will be joining us over the course of the next few days, and also understand that we come from different places, we speak different languages and different voices, but in this space we're the same and we're all together.
And now we will be having an amazing cultural session. Zane, do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, that's great. So in Pacific culture, we welcome people with the giving of gifts, and that exchange is a sign of respect and marks the commitment that we make with each other, that we will nurture the relationship and the space between us. In Fiji today, our team carried out a traditional Galo Galovi, or gift-giving ceremony, to honor and mark the opening of this important and historical gathering. We also this evening want to celebrate and share with you the work of artists who stand up for climate justice and a better tomorrow. Patti Smith, Rebecca and Jess Paris Smith are examples of this. They have been singing and performing for climate justice and freedom for many decades, encouraging people onto the streets. So, now I'm going to share with you some beautiful ceremony, culture, music, and spoken word.
I cannot wait. This is a treat, guys.
Utama.
Oi, oi.
Oi, oi.
Watu rasa tu benar-benar ya buso sia-sia.
Oi. Tambole buia. Hi.
Nabunua. Ibiti na singi binang di kuah. Kena raki sulu tu na kabe binang di kuah. Bila. Kena bunua ya namulu-mulu. Watu rantal tu ngai nabunua. Namatin tu pati kena wal na 350.org. Na ya kabe binang di kuah. Pati kena be matin tu mi warong tu kana lo meni singa lebu binang di kuah. Kena me raka tu kan don kena galgulu bi bikim do singa lebu binang di kuah. Di nombeka. Ina sanga ni do na kila. Yo kena waro babiti. Ni ber ni raka don kami na galubi mai. Sena galubi na ropale silesi. Ser bang ni sembutu kibiti. Ongo na ti warau. Kena kamunang sami taw tunggo. Alam ni matin totolu. Ikumbuna wana turana buni wal na tuikamba. Inugu benua, inugu matin tu na bersanga, wana merama na roh tindriketi. Turana buni wal, matin tu nganga na tobata. Matin tu nganga na tobata nundu benua. Singo binane ku. Lele sal tumbaga na masrau. Lele sal tumbaga na kamunang me warta kibikim do. Tu na kami na garabe no lo mi singo binaka. Bida na singa sabo aso sore tu. Ura.
Saka.
Kuah.
Ingom sakti ko na kamunanga. May na song na 350.org. Kena reliu. Ingom sakti ko na bukondra na lewe burbura. Be matin tu burbura. Dinto ba ko na bosa sami tawoti. Dona kaki memba bin binaktaka. Ndari de chukna kabiongo. Ni sembul minaktunga na nanda biba turang taki. Kena nanda biba menmeni.
Walehu.
Sa ni mami masuti ko ni nababutukana na song sa tunggo na matanda na lam na business singongo. Sa ni palapsar na wasa biba binbinak ni dinzingongo. Sa ni mami mastik ngani da. Dana velo mantiko. Dana yalong gangatiko. Dana yalong gitiko na tos balap tos ndrengo. Kami nonta bata tiko na lolom binakan telo.
Mana? Dina. Amdo. Do. Na balik.
amidst many rapturous voices, we come together, together.
Shouting out, last one sing, for it is came in molten being.
We have arrived, but the journey goes on. From this generation to the next, we dream, we strive, we are strong. People of the sea, we who are free, free to choose, free to be. Led to what we ask, led to what we receive. People of the sea, we who are free, free to choose, free to be. Led to what we ask, led to what we receive.
We remember the old and rejoice in the new.
We remember the song. We knew.
We have arrived, but the journey goes on.
From this generation to the next, we dream, we strive, we are strong. We who are free, free to choose, free to be. Led to what we ask, led to what we receive. Keep on keeping on, let nothing hold you back. Oh, speak up, shout it out, heart and soul. That's what it's all about. Led to what we ask, led to what we receive. People of the sea, we who are free, free to choose, free to be. Led to what we ask, led to what we receive. Whoa, people, people, people.
We will see.
People of the sea, we who are free, free to choose, free to be. Led to what we ask, led to what we receive. Led to what we ask, led to what we
Yesterday I saw you standing there with your hands against the pane, looking out the window at the rain. And I wanted to tell you that your tears were not in vain. But I guess we both knew we'd never be the same. Never be the same. Why must we hide all these feelings? Maybe one day we'll be strong enough to build it back again. Build the peaceable kingdom back again. Build it back again. Why must we hide all these feelings inside? Lions and lambs shall abide. Maybe one day we'll be strong enough to build it back again. Build the peaceable kingdom back again. Maybe one day we'll be strong enough. We can build it back again. Build the peaceable kingdom. Build it back again. Build the peaceable kingdom. Build it back again. I was dreaming, in my dreaming, of an aspect bright and fair, and my sleeping, it was broken, but my dream, it lingered near, in the farm of shining valleys, where the pure air rarefied, and my senses newly opened, I awakened to the cry that the people have the power to redeem the work of fools upon the meek. The graces shower, it's decreed, the people rule.
Wow,
Wow.
that was amazing. I am speechless from
Yeah.
the ceremony at the start to the wow. That was
I agree.
something else.
I
Yeah.
think ceremony, culture, and music are so important because they don't just preserve our stories, but they help us connect them, and they bring so much color and richness to our activism and advocacy. And so, I just hope everybody carries that throughout our next few days together.
Definitely. And it's also a good reminder that this is what we're trying to protect, this humanity, this culture, this beauty. And I think to bring that in, our next session is about our next panel is about just recovery for all, and we're going to be able to hear from amazing speakers. And I can't wait for that, because this is why we need a just recovery, because of that amazing music, this amazing culture, this amazing rawness, I guess, the humanity. This is why we're aiming for a just recovery.
Yeah, I agree. So do you want to introduce our next panel?
Yes, so we have amazing speakers like Hakima Abbas, Naomi Klein, Amitav Ghosh, Dominic Palmer, and this will all be moderated by Aggie Hall. And I am very excited for this one because I heard it is a really, really good panel to start us off on this amazing global event.
will put you all on the side.
Global Just Recovery Gathering.
So, hello and welcome to the first Global Just Recovery Gathering panel. It's aptly titled Just Recovery for All to kick off this momentous event. My name is Agnes Hall. I'm the Global Campaigns Director at 350, and it's a real honour to speak with such incredible global thinkers today. Thank you so much for joining me. Before we get down to it, I want to introduce our highly prestigious panel. We have Hakima Abbas in Kenya. She is the co-executive director of AWID, which is the Association for Women's Rights and Development, if you didn't know. She's a global feminist movement, that's a global feminist movement support and membership organization. She is also in the leadership of the Global Black Feminist Fund. We also have Amitav Ghosh joining from New York. He is an award-winning writer who holds 2 Lifetime Achievement Awards and 4 honorary doctorates, which is pretty impressive to say the least. In 2019, Foreign Policy magazine named him as one of the most important global thinkers of the preceding decade. We also have Naomi Klein joining from Canada. I feel she needs little introduction, but just to say she is an award-winning journalist and New York Times best-selling author. We also have Dominique Palmer joining us from the UK. Dominique is an organiser within Fridays for Future International and is the launch coordinator for Climate Live. She is featured on the Forbes 100 leading UK environmentalist list for her work. So thank you so much again for being here today. Honestly, when the 350 team asked me to moderate this panel, I was overjoyed. It's a real honour. So let's get down to our conversation about a just recovery. So to preface that, this last year has been a truly difficult year for people around the world. In the face of a deadly virus, we've had to start staying at home. We could no longer able to organise in the way that we used to in movements, and many of us couldn't even see our loved ones. So today we're going to be discussing what a just recovery looks like, not only taking into account the COVID crisis, but also thinking, how can we use this opportunity to think about a recovery that encompasses health, economic and climate crises that are all so interlinked, as we know. So let's get started. Naomi, I wanted to turn to you and say, I've just read your book, How to Change Everything, which is a really thoughtful book about how young people can take action on climate change. How do you think this moment of the global pandemic has changed the work that movements need to do? And how do you think it changes our asks to government?
Sure. First, I just want to say what a pleasure it is to be on this amazing panel. And I can't wait to hear from these brilliant thinkers and doers. And yeah, it's such a huge question. But I think, I guess where my mind goes for this question is something that the science fiction writer Kim Stanley Robinson wrote early on in the pandemic, which was that we're so off script right now that one has the sense that we're writing a science fiction novel together. And I think that there's something really hopefully liberating about that, in the sense that we are, like, things have changed so quickly, not in the ways that we would have wanted, but we all now on this planet have this bodily experience of rapid transformation. And so, you know, I think, as we all know, a lot of what we're up against when we call for change on the scale that our interlocking and intersecting crises demand, the biggest thing we're up against is not what we were up against 5 years ago, which was like an argument like, no, we can solve this with technical fixes. You know, it's just doomism. It's just, we can't, it's too big, you know, like the global economy is moving too fast. It's just not possible. And so what I hope we can do maybe is hold on to this experience of how quickly things did change. And not to say that they all changed in the right ways or the ways that we would have wanted, but we have seen massive changes in our societies and in our individual lives. And to then say, okay, how do we design change now? How do we, because we obviously need economic stimulus, we need large scale action. This is now being recognized by a lot of neoliberal economists. So what should that look like? And I think COVID has been an amazing kind of diagnostic tool in just showing us everything that is broken, everyone who is being excluded, whatever injustice, whatever inequality pre-existed COVID was exacerbated by it. Whoever was being treated as disposable before COVID was treated as sacrificial during it. And so a just recovery heals this. It starts from from what COVID revealed and says, okay, what message has that sent us?
Yeah, and I think your point about having seen such rapid change over the last year is totally right. We've seen large scale change, and we also know that things can continue to change and quickly. So thank you so much for that. I'm delighted to have Dominique join us today, and I would be really interested, Dominique, to hear from you as a young person, what kind of change you think is required, particularly for young people. So I know that you've said before, young people will be particularly affected by the interconnected health, economic and climate crises, but how do you see that happening in the world, and what do you think needs to be done to support young people?
Yes. So, well, first of all, it is a pleasure to be on this panel with such incredible people. And as a young person, there is so much that we're calling for to support us and our future, this crisis. And we can already see the interconnected issues of the crisis taking place, especially for certain communities, including young people across the world. And as the crisis worsens, this threat for our generation increases. And when it comes to interconnected issues such as health, for example, I lived and grew up in one of the most polluted areas in London, and the inequality there is really obvious, especially across the UK, as most communities of colour are most likely to live in these areas that are most polluted. And so the very air that we breathe is being threatened, and this will be exacerbated for my generation and the next by this crisis. Air pollution is just one factor that significantly affects health and is so interconnected to this crisis. This crisis threatens our lives, water, livelihoods, which are already being disproportionately, there are already communities being disproportionately impacted by this, and those marginalized and those in poverty, for example. And we know how the crisis also causes harm in the form of disasters as well, and this causes climate refugees and puts people in vulnerable situations as well, and how viruses increase in frequency as the climate continues. All of these different interconnected issues will be exacerbated if we continue to have inaction on the climate crisis. And even the impact on our mental health, which really isn't discussed as much. This threat, unsurprisingly, has significant psychological impacts, and one of those being eco-anxiety that a lot of young people are facing today. And so from a socio-economic and justice perspective, workers and marginalized communities could be left behind and left in the most vulnerable positions. And so we need to have a just transition that protects people and the planet. And as young people, we are calling for concrete climate action plans that include and account for climate and environmental justice. And so the future that I see, where my generation and the next are protected, is one that has true environmental justice at the heart of it. And so that requires that all people deserve the right to a healthy environment, including the provision of clean air, land, water, and food. And so we must have equity in our solutions, because without it, we have no solid foundations to build on. And so policy must be based on climate justice that addresses the interconnected aspects of the crisis and seeks to eliminate social and economic equality alongside it. For the future, we really need to decarbonize in a way that protects us, protects marginalized communities, and protects workers, and that places the well-being of people and our natural world at the heart of it. To stop endless ecological destruction for profit, young people need to be included in the decision-making in these spaces and able to engage. We need climate reparations for those who are most responsible for climate breakdown and to support those who have been wronged. we need legislation where governments and corporations, for example, can be tried for environmental destruction and held accountable. Indigenous communities and native peoples must have their rights protected and their practices respected, because this is key to protecting our biodiversity. And this is also one thing we're calling for, especially in the UK with our Teach the Future campaign. We need education for present and future generations that really teach the reality of the crisis, as well as centering social and environmental issues that are interlinked with this.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Dominique, thank you so much. And what you're talking about the need for inclusion, you know, the climate crisis needs everyone to help solve it. And we need young people, we need, of course, people from marginalized and frontline communities. And we need to have a really inclusive climate movement that puts compelling solutions on the table. Amitav, I wanted to turn to you and say, I think one of the things that we actually struggle with, or we can struggle with, is when we're trying to paint a clear picture of an alternative world, so something different to the one that we live in now. It's hard to really capture public imagination in that truly inclusive and broad brush way as something we can work towards together. And I just wanted to ask you, as a renowned author and an amazing writer, do you have any thoughts or tips for people watching today on how we could best visualize and communicate what a just recovery could look like, and what that world could look like, and, you know, what our pathway to that world could be?
Well, let me say, first of all, what a pleasure it is to be on this panel with all of you. I mean, it's just so interesting to listen, just listening to what you're saying. And I think it's so important, everything that Dominique said, you know. You know, I think imagining an alternative is very difficult in many ways, simply because, as Naomi pointed out, there have been, you know, I mean, we seem to be sort of trapped within this kind of acceleration. But two things I would want to say there. You know, one of the lessons of this time is that activism works. You know, if you think about it, Bolsonaro has done and is doing everything possible to undo, really to turn the Amazon into a kind of new Midwest, you know, just filled with monocultures and, you know, cattle farming and so on. And yet he hasn't been able to do that, you know, partly because Brazil has a good regulatory structure left in place since the 80s by various left-wing governments, and because there are a lot of Brazilian activists. Similarly, in the US, you know, Trump tried to undo a lot of regulation, and he wasn't actually able to. You know, 350.org has actually played a large part in this, you know, by preventing companies and investors from getting into the opportunities that Trump was trying to open up for them. So I think those are important lessons to remember, you know. The really important thing, though, is actually, I mean, at this moment, it's so incumbent upon all of us to try and imagine alternatives, you know, just alternative ways of living. You know, I mean, that's really the challenge. And there again, I would say the activism of the last, you know, 8 to 10 years, you know, has been very inspiring to me in many ways. And for this, I entirely give the credit to young people, you know. Say, just visiting all the Occupy sites, and I visited many Occupy sites around 2012. You know, what they were trying to do was to perform another kind of life. You know, living in shacks, sharing meals, creating sorts of all sorts of protocols for interaction with each other, you know. And similarly, you know, I've only read about the No DAPL movement. I know that Naomi has been there, spent a lot of time with them. I think one of the really interesting things that they were trying to do was to demonstrate a different way of living. So it wasn't just a protest in the normal sense. I mean, they were performing something, you know, they were performing a different way of life. And I think I see this with a lot of protests, you know, I mean, with XR, with Writers Rebel and so on. There's a performative aspect to it in which they're trying to, as it were, imagine different ways of living.
Yeah, that's really interesting and helpful, and I think nourishing food for thought when we're thinking about what a just recovery in a new world could look like. That activism is really inspiring and it is really hopeful, and you know that is happening all over the world. And actually, we need action on all kinds of different issues in order to kind of lead to a just recovery. All strands of justice are needed, all kinds of action are needed. And I heard someone say the other day, I really liked, that we need to try and take action to usher in new kinds of justice at the moment. And so that does require imagination and thinking in that creative way and envisaging that. Hakima, I wanted to ask you, when we're thinking about all these different kinds of justice that are required, you know, obviously a really important area is women's rights and gender justice. Do you think that women's rights have been pushed to the side or uplifted in conversations about recovery? And is there anything you think we can do to better platform and support women's rights as part of our campaigning for a just recovery?
Thanks so much, Aggie, for the question. I mean, I'd like to start by uplifting the names of Fikile Tsangazi, Tuli Mdlovo, Anna Marie Chai, Lemita Evangelista, Maritza Quiroz Leva, and the many other women who've died defending land and territory and the earth. And I really start there because I think it's important for us to remember that this struggle isn't being waged in abstraction. People are really paying with their lives, particularly Black, Indigenous women and queer workers. And so I know that a just recovery requires a deep reckoning. We don't just have to recover, as we know, from a pandemic. We have to recover from essentially the largest ever global wealth heist by the 1%. We have to recover from patriarchy that hasn't only wreaked violence on women, trans and non-binary people, but it's also created methods of governance and systems of labor and practices of relationship that are coercive. And so for me, a just recovery is following the lead of women farmers in West Africa who used their solidarity networks for mutual aid during the pandemic, sending each other seeds that they had saved. These women claim that nous sommes la solution, we are the solution, because they're using and constantly innovating agroecological farming methods that can save our planet from the disaster that industrial agriculture is reaping. So in terms of women in the conversation of the recovery, we've been organizing around the idea of a feminist economic recovery, because as we know, all around the world, those most deeply impacted by crises are impoverished women, trans and non-binary people. So a feminist economic recovery is about kind of shifting the political subjectivity at the center of the demand for a just recovery. And what that does is change the demand itself. Like during this pandemic, I think we've all seen the centrality of care for thriving societies and how strongly our societies depend on care work. And during the pandemic, we've seen that the care burden has sharply increased on women. So if we can imagine an economy that centers around care rather than around production, it would be a completely different logic to the economy and would be transformative in so many ways, socially, politically, culturally. So a feminist economic recovery demands things like public universal care systems and demands that we redefine wealth as a community asset that's created through our collective unpaid and paid labor. And certainly there just needs to be much more attention around the ways in which gendered impacts of our multiple crises are happening. One of the examples again is around debt cancellation. I live and am from Africa, and of course the odious debt has systematically depleted state capacity in Africa to fund adequate public services. And that has a disproportionate impact and burden on women in societies. And so we need to put debt cancellation, tax justice, and beyond that reparations, which Dominique mentioned, to restructure our economies and eventually to reverse the harm of wealth extraction and privatization.
Thank you so much for that, Hakima. And I love what you're saying about the centrality of care over production and how that's, you know, been important and needs to be made more of. So, you know, we've been talking a bit about solutions so far and about what's needed, and it's been so great to hear your insights on that. But doing a bit of a pivot from real solutions for a just recovery, I wanted to hear what you think about false solutions. So personally, for me, misinformation is something that really gets to me on a deep level, and I campaign on combating misinformation in my spare time. But there, of course, there's so many false solutions out there. Naomi, what threat do you think that greenwashing and false solutions pose to us in this moment?
I would prefer to think about it as almost like a challenge to us, as opposed to a threat, in the sense that they are a threat and they always have been. But they are a greater threat when our movements fail to be as ambitious and taking up as much space as we need to take up, and putting our solutions on the agenda and connecting with people and building them in miniature, as Amitav said, but also, larger than a protest camp, but also, in cities, at the subnational level, in communities, so that people can really live the fact that what a just transition means is that responding to the climate crisis is not going to just be better than a future of apocalyptic breakdown that you saw in a sci-fi movie. It's better than Tuesday. It's tangibly improving daily life with things like, free public transit and green, beautiful, community-based public housing or affordable housing on a commons model. And so giving people the experiences to say, you don't have to be afraid of this, right? Because we've been up against these talking points from the fossil fuel industry for so long that have told people, if we act on climate, you will lose your job, your life will be terrible. So we need to give people those experiences, and we have this opening, this opportunity. If we fail, then the planet hackers and all of the techno solutions and the Bill Gates model enters into the people's fear and panic and says, we have the magic bullet, right? But I actually don't believe that hacking the sun is a more appealing solution than community, energy democracy, public housing, solutions, a real indigenous-led youth climate core that's going to plant billions of trees and give land back to indigenous people. I mean, this is a beautiful future we're talking about, right? This is better than the present. And so, yeah, those threats are real, but I feel like they get their energy from our failure, from our lack of ambition, because actually what they're proposing is dismal and terrifying to anybody with any kind of forethought. People don't really want to dim the sun. That's a terrible, terrible vision. So yeah, and I mean, I think we're picking up on what Hakima said. I think it's really important that we say, yes, we, in this moment where people are finally recognizing the centrality of care work, we need to also say, hey, that's low carbon work. Like a green job isn't just a guy putting up a solar panel. It isn't just the idea that we get to have the exact same high consumer lives, only we're getting our energy from so-called green sources. It means that we are valuing different things and living differently and living more potentially happier, more beautiful lives. To pick up on Dominique's point about the mental health crisis, this system is failing people. People are not happy, And I think in this moment, when we have a very vivid memory of what we did and did not miss during this period, we can't let this slip away as normal comes roaring back, quote unquote normal, right? Because people didn't miss shopping, they missed each other, they missed gatherings, they missed celebrating together, and the future we're talking about actually gives people so much that we've missed most. And so, yeah, I feel like we have honestly a short window where before that runaway train called normal comes slamming back into our lives, to just hold on to the teachings, the learnings of this really, really hard year, right?
Yeah, I mean, I love that the train of normal comes barging in, and that is very likely to happen soon. But I hear what you're saying about also about these half-baked compromises and solutions that, you know, just, do we really want those? No. And Amitav, I know that you've said before, because I did my research, that the West has come to rely on what you call an expert discourse from scientists, and that the result is the West puts its hope in business-friendly sustainable development, which can include a lot of false solutions. So I guess same question to you, what challenge do you think false solutions particularly pose to us and the climate movement and other movements at this time?
You know, I really think it's been a problem for the climate discourse as such, that it comes out of such a narrow sphere. You know, I mean, almost everything that's written about climate comes out of Western academies, think tanks. You know, within the discourse, really, there is so few, you know, Indian, Asian, African voices, so few voices that are heard. You know, I think it's genuinely a disaster, you know, for the climate movement as such, because why is the voice of the woman who has to walk 5 miles to fetch water and then 10 miles to fetch water, why is that voice not heard more clearly? Why is it always reduced to various kinds of numbers and, you know, various equations and this and that? And I think, you know, the very fact that the whole discourse has come to be surrounded with such a sort of air of expertise, you know, has actually a very intimidating effect. It keeps people out. It keeps young people out. It keeps a lot of people who don't have access to that kind of expertise. It keeps them out of the whole discourse. So I do feel that it's a very, very important thing to broaden this discourse, to bring in other voices, to bring in a grassroots perspective. You know, after all, Asian and African farmers and fishermen have known for a long time, you know, that the climate is changing in disastrous ways. And some of them have been able to adapt, but it's not a surprise to them, you know. So it's very, very important to reintegrate these voices, you know, within the discourse, because one of the reasons why this entire discourse is so easy for governments to ignore is simply because, you know, it doesn't mobilize a large number of people. But even there, you know, one of the sort of really false solutions, I would say, you know, I think India is a very good example of this, you know, of just constant greenwashing, you know, just, I mean, what can I say? I mean, the waterfalls of greenwashing rhetoric, you know, comes out of the government. And at the same time, in the most underhand way, they've really dismantled the regulatory structures. You know, I mean, they've, for at least, you know, previous governments had some common sense and didn't allow building within 100 meters of the shoreline. Slowly but steadily, this government has whittled away at it. And, you know, you know, the government keeps getting sort of kudos from foreign agencies, from the UN. It's unbelievable to me, honestly. And, you know, look what they're doing. They're locking up young climate activists like Disha Ravi. I'm sure you saw that, you know. So, you know, we really have to keep in mind that, you know, this greenwashing is a real danger.
Aggie, could I add something to what Anna
Please, please. I was just going to invite you and Dominique to please do feel free to build.
Just because I really want to build on what you just said, Amitav, around the fact that the solutions have always been also there, and that those of us in the Global South really have many of those solutions. I mentioned the women farmers in West Africa. And I think, I don't know, you all remember Tina, the Margaret Thatcher, there is no alternative to capitalism and all of those things. But I live in a context in Africa where 80% of jobs in urban contexts are in the informal economy. 90% of women rely on the so-called informal economy, but which we call the people's economy. And it's not the dominant economy, because and the dominant economy is propped up by a few people who are making obscene amounts of money and wealth, up to holding this very colonial, IMF-imposed, privatize and monetize everything kind of economy. But when you're talking about nearly everyone being traders and somehow engaged in another market, another economy, can you really say that there's no alternative? We live this alternative every day, not least because if we didn't, we wouldn't survive the dominant economy. And the people's economy has its own logic, a logic that kind of brings closer the social, the cultural, political logic of the communities that are involved. And even though that's not always liberatory or necessarily liberatory, there's important seeds of what can blossom in the ways that mutual aid, solidarity, cooperation show up in that kind of economy. So I feel like we need a people's funeral for Tina. We need to really squash the myth of that inevitability and pervasiveness of neoliberal capitalism. And I think our culture workers, as Amitav said earlier, can really help us write our realities into the history books and help us to keep dreaming our freedom practice. There was a writer, Tony Cade Bambara, who's an African culture worker in the US, who said, "My job is to make revolution irresistible." And I think that's really what places such centrality in cultural workers in many of our contexts.
Definitely, what's been said. And I wanted to add on there to what Amitav said as well about the kind of the movement right now, and also the expertise element of it that kind of keeps people out of it. And I find that a lot of the time, it almost like a gate keeps people from coming into the movement. It makes them feel as if they have nothing to offer, when in reality, for a just recovery, it is so essential that we have the perspectives from all of these people. And yet that's being stopped because those in power who want to upkeep this system want it to stay like that. They don't want these kind of new perspectives to come in. They don't want that radical thought process to happen, and they don't want change to happen. And so building up this grassroots movement is so crucial, so that we have those different perspectives when it comes to solutions and when it comes to a just recovery. And I often find that these kind of false solutions they're always staying within the narrow, like, Western boxes, as has been mentioned. And it's so ridiculous to even consider that we can solve this crisis the same way that we got into it. For a just recovery, we have to completely reshape this. And greenwashing, to me, is it's straight up lying. It's just complete deceiving. And that is one of our biggest challenges that we really have to get over. Because one of the ways that we're going to even push for a just recovery is by having mobilization, is by having more people, and is by having those perspectives from a grassroots movement. And to mobilize people, we have to tap into the potential that's there. We have to tap into the fact that people care but aren't quite there yet. People don't know about the interconnected aspects of the crisis, and people are falling into the greenwashing and the lies that's being fed to them. And so it's really crucial in that way that when we focus on, like, our movements and mobilization, that we're really, really pushing for that, and pushing into ending this gatekeeping and making it inclusive. Because if we don't have that inclusivity in it, we're not going to solve this crisis. And we have to overcome that barrier of trying to upkeep the current system that's in place.
Great, thank you so much. Such a rich conversation on false solutions, and I really wish we had more time, because this is such a great panel. Don't want to let you go, but we do have to wrap up shortly. So I just have one more question, which is a bit of a lightning round. So you can just go ahead and jump in. But my final question is, in many ways, of course, the pandemic has been incredibly hard on people around the world. But what message of hope would you like to share with everyone watching this from the Just Recovery gathering, and even beyond, maybe? Dominique, would you like to start?
So my message that I want people watching this to kind of come away with is that now, even though we've been through such, an incredibly hard time, there is also hope in what has happened, in that, as mentioned before, it's really exposed the fabrics of society and the unequal foundations and for a better future, we really do need to unite. Like, now really is the time for a united fight of liberation, and to remember that another world is possible as long as we act and as long as we come together. The power of the people is truly monumental, as we've seen in the past. Movements aren't just a thing of history, they're not just something that's happened in the past. Movements are ongoing and they're now. And as people, we all have such incredible power when we unite and really push forward in collective action. So really take that and just remember that we do have power as people, and now is the time.
Well, I guess one thing I would just say about a hopeful note is that even though we're up against huge forces and a pretty firm and unyielding deadline to get our act together before things truly spiral out of control, they're pretty far out of control now. It's worth remembering that things are changing very quickly from a movement perspective as well. When I wrote This Changes Everything, which came out in 2014, which was really calling for an intersectional, roots up, a transformational approach that would really get at capitalism and white supremacy and center reparations in how we respond to this crisis, building on work that was coming from the global South and the calls from Bolivia, Nigeria, and Ecuador for climate debt and reparations and a Marshall Plan for planet Earth. It was treated as absolutely off the wall, in mainstream circles in the United States. I couldn't have imagined the Fridays for Future movement. I couldn't have imagined the Sunrise movement. I couldn't have imagined Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the Squad, or even the Bernie Sanders campaign. So we have to remember that we are changing too, and we are. It's never fast enough that we're getting our acts together, but we are. And I think a lot of that is because of Dominique's generation just being so clear about not being willing to accept the siloing, the compartmentalization, the policing of the boundaries of acceptable discourse, but insisting that we have to actually get to the root of these crises and advance responses on the scale of the crises that we face. I take heart from the fact that Hollywood had us wrong. We've seen so many visions of the future where things start falling apart and people come out of their homes to eat each other's brains, right? That's the plot of every zombie movie. Well, in the pandemic, people came out of their homes after months of lockdown to join Black Lives Matter demonstrations and stand up for people they don't know. So maybe we aren't quite as bad as we were told we were, and maybe there's a little hope in that.
Well, if I can add something to that, and especially speaking to some of the points that Hakima has made, I think what the pandemic has provided some very hopeful signs. One of the real problems with the world in the past has been this incredible sort of this way of thinking where it's always about progress defined in a certain way, where some countries are thought of as advanced and some are thought of as backward. But what the COVID pandemic has shown us is that really some of the worst outcomes have come from so-called advanced countries, whereas some of the best outcomes have come from Africa and Asia. Senegal has proved itself to be a world leader, in public health, and so has Sierra Leone. And one of the reasons for that is simply because, exactly as Hakima says, there are grassroots levels approaches to these issues. I really suspect that, this is a harbinger of the future. Climate change is going to upend really all our expectations of the world.
I would say with this push that you've all mentioned to get back to normal, we really have to keep the pressure up. And we can learn from the practices and experiences of women, trans and non-binary people and young people all over the world, in Venezuela, Rojava, Chiapas, Jackson and Zimbabwe. and to remember the words of June Jordan, we're not powerless, we're indispensable despite all the atrocities of state and corporate policy to the contrary. At the very least, if we can't control things, we certainly can mess them up.
Thank you so much for that final comments. And I love that idea. We can't control it, but we can certainly mess it up. That's fantastic. And I hope that everyone continues to keep messing things up in their own way. Thank you so much to all the panelists for such an interesting conversation today. Like, I really enjoyed it. It's been such a pleasure. And I really hope you've enjoyed yourselves too. And that everyone who's listening has enjoyed it as much as I have. I want to wish everyone at the gathering a really good time over the next few days, and to wish everyone good health for you and your families. It's been such a tough year for so many people, but I hope conversations like this give you all hope, as they certainly do for me, and inspiration to keep taking action for a just recovery. So much love from 350 and from the Just Recovery Gathering. Thank you so much.
Incontro mondiale per la ripresa
Global Just Recovery Gathering.
Wow. Well, a big thank you to that. I mean, I don't think there's much more we can say in terms of how deep and how rich that conversation was. And I think one of the great things that came out of there is that we know that the pandemic reminded us that we actually can reimagine and re-envision what this world is and can be. And at this gathering, that's the question I think we all need to ask ourselves, because that's the opportunity we're presented with. How do we collectively imagine a world that's centered in justice and equity and care and love? That's our job together, I think. And I guess it's not the only thing we're doing here at the gathering. Mitzi, what else do we have to do?
So I'm sure everyone is feeling extremely inspired, as you said. So let's turn that inspiration and that motivation we got from that amazing panel and turn it into action. So I want everyone right now to take a second to go to 350.org/summit. Again, that's 350.org/summit, and sign a petition. So there are petitions there, especially with US President Joe Biden coming up in his climate summit on the April 22nd to 23rd, where he's inviting 40 world leaders. And as the politicals go, we'll be delivering that petition. So make sure to sign this petition and check it out, and really just do whatever we can to fight for that just recovery.
That's the first of our sessions. How cool is that?
That's amazing.
And
now, it's not just the sessions, yeah.
Yep. Well, now are we going to invite folks, I think, in between these plenaries and cultural sessions, we're going to head into some workshops now, but maybe take some time to have a stretch. And then workshops happen in Zoom rooms. You can find the link by clicking on the sessions and choosing the various 90-minute workshops that you're about to start. We'll take you straight to them. If you think of anything great that you would want to go to, I'm heading straight over to the one that we might be facilitating in a minute, out in Stoppadani. So just have a look in the sessions list. You can find it there. Click, we'll take you to the Zoom link, but make sure you also have a stretch before then.
Perfect. And I am looking forward to all the amazing sessions and workshops, not just now, but also tomorrow and for the next 3 days. So stay tuned, guys. This is just the first cycle, and there's so much more that's in store for everyone.
Let's see. Hello again. What an incredible first cycle. I think I've been blessed to have experienced the connections that are possible within these spaces. And what is beautiful is being able to stitch together stories from all over the world to show the wider picture of what the climate movement is and the possibilities of the world that we can create together. And this was the first cycle. It was a really big experiment. And I think we had almost 38 workshops and movement story sessions. Many of these were recorded, so we'll be sharing ways that you can watch them later. And these cultural sessions that we're going to at the moment are being recorded too. What's coming up next, Mickey?
Just like what you said, we're going to have cultural sessions, and it's so exciting. We are going to have artists from Chile, from the ensemble of Transatlantico de Folk Chileno, to dance alongside their music of joy. Then we're going to jump on to Europe with the Warsaw Village Band, and they're going to take us rowing in the wild as we listen to their song Water Invocation. Then we're going to hear a powerful voice from the Mapuche indigenous singer from Argentina named Beatriz Pichimalen. And then we're going to close this amazing artistic session with the Theater of Eternal Values and their performance Breath of the Earth. I'm so excited for this. Let's go for it.
Kepai mai nga kepai mai nganglu keruf mai kepai mai wili keruf mai kepai mai nga kepai wai wan keruf mai pikum keruf mai kepai mai nga kepai mai wila wila wiri pui kacu mai nga wili mai nga pikum keruf am wili keruf am wila wila wi kacu mai kacu ngelu kuruf mai ngangenyi mai ngangenga makod makodar pui kura mai ngakura ma ui 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 nga mai nga wili kuruf mai wila wila wi nongko lem nga mamel cengam mamelenga ui 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 ui
Absolutely amazing. I am so moved by watching that. How do you feel, Zane?
I feel great. Like I said, I think this is the beautiful thing about this gathering is that if we can stitch all of our stories together, it just forms this beautiful tapestry of color and culture and sound, just like we just experienced.
That was amazing. So I think we're about to end this amazing cycle. We're going to go into a 2-hour break and we're going to have a next cycle after that. We're going to have more panels, more workshops, more sessions, and you can join us, or maybe it's time for you to sleep and you can join us later. But there's still so much in store in the 3 days of the Just Recovery Gathering. This is only day one, cycle one. I am so excited.
Yes, me too. I'm also so excited to sleep while the rest of you continue on.
Same. And right now, you can still use the networking lounge to keep chatting with each other and looking at the exhibit hall to get to know our partners. And it's crazy. It's like a real life conference, and I'm so excited for this.
Me too. And I guess the next time you'll see folks from us, it'll be Daniel and Anna.
So bye. I'm Mitzi. I don't think we got to introduce each other. I'm Mitzi from the Philippines,
And I'm Zane from the Pacific.
and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.